LA Kings fans had so much on their minds this week. We have a second fan feedback show on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years. Also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's going into its 19th year, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. It's time for another Kings fan feedback show. As a matter of fact, if you missed it, and for the first time ever, this is our second of back-to-back fan feedback shows because you guys had so much on your minds that you wanted to share. Before we get to the next group of emails, I did want to pass along one bit of NHL news because it kind of pertains to something we've talked about on a previous show. We had kind of daydreamed about the Kings maybe getting this player, but Florida Panthers forward Sam Bennett, the reigning Conn Smythe Trophy winner as playoff MVP and to be a restricted or unrestricted free agent coming up, told a group of fans at a Stanley Cup celebration that he is staying in Florida and that he's getting an 8-year deal to remain with the two-time defending champs. It was pretty unlikely that the Panthers were going to let him get away, and probably just as unlikely that he would want to leave. So if Sam Bennett is telling the truth, and no reason to believe he isn't, he is not going to test free agency, which is now 11 days away as we record this show on Friday. So you can scratch Sam Bennett off of your wish list for the LA Kings. As for this show, let us get into the second round of emails from you guys. Great to have so much feedback on the LA Kings this week. And we start with Dorian. He is in Tampa, Florida. He says, hey, Eddie, first-time corresponder, long-time listener. Great to have you, Dorian. He says, I've been listening to you to your take and several others on the trade market, free agency, and draft eligibility. Have you heard about Marty Necas being unhappy in Colorado? The guy has 1 year left on a $6.5 million deal, right-handed forward, instead of Mitch Mner, who will command an outrageous amount of money on the market, or Brock Besser, who gets injured pretty easily. Why not go after Martin? If I were Ken Holland, I would trade our first-round pick in 2025 and our seventh-round pick in 2025, along with Trevor Moore for Marty Necas and a prospect or future consideration, since Colorado doesn't have a lot of draft assets next year. This opens up significant cap space to re-sign Gavrikov, Kuzmenko, Laferriere, and maybe even Tanner Jeannot. If we can trade Jordan Spence for a pick or two, that would open up some space as well. So those are the thoughts of Dorian in Tampa. We did talk a little bit about Marty Necas in part one of our fan feedback show. If you trade for Necas, then you have to know that he is going to sign a new deal with the Kings. You don't want to get into a situation like we saw with Mikko Rantanen and the Carolina Hurricanes where they're like, oh yeah, let's trade for him and then we'll talk him into wanting to stay here once he gets here. And he was like, I don't want to be here. And then they end up having to trade him. So you can't put yourself into that kind of a corner. So if you are going to trade for a guy like a Marty Necas, who's a very good player and could solve some of the Kings issues at right wing with the right shot, got to make sure you can sign him, or else he may walk at the end of next year after you trade for him. So if that's the case, if they can pull that off, sure, it's a great idea. So there's talk of him wanting $8 to $9 million per season. So that is how much he's going to have to re-sign for. And then, signing that would be after this season though. So the Kings would still have him at 6.5, as you said. And then once they would sign him to a contract, but it wouldn't kick in until next year. So you could still, with the cap space for this year, re-sign Gavrikov and Kuzmenko and Laferriere and whoever else you can. And then you deal with what's going to happen next year when maybe Anze Kopitar's contract is off the books and who else, who knows what else. So if you can get a player like that, as long as he is going to re-sign with you, then yes, I would say that's certainly a player to investigate. getting. Plus, you mentioned Tanner Jeannot, friend of the show, Russell Morgan from Hockey Royalty, did put out on social media early on Friday, quote, hearing Tanner Jeannot won't be returning to LA next season and will hit the open market on July 1st. So if that report is true, don't know who Russell's sources are, but he says he's hearing that Tanner Jeannot will not be coming back to LA. And I've heard some other rumblings about that as well. So not a complete shock there. We'll see. Our next email comes from Alex. He is in Glendale, California. And he says, I wanted to know if you have any preferences for the Kings pick this year, whether that's a certain prospect or if there's a particular player out there that you'd like to see the pick flip for. Keep up the great work as always. Go Kings, go. And a short and sweet one from Alex in Glendale. He's obviously talking about who do I think the Kings will pick in the draft. I fully admit that I'm just getting to know these players kind of along with you. If you're watching the show and you've seen me give the background on some of these players that we think are going to be available around pick number 24 for the Kings. And the research I've done has helped me, for the show, has helped me to learn who some of these guys are. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm any kind of an expert on the NHL draft. Just generally speaking, for me, I would like to see the Kings take the best available defenseman. We've got two great goalie prospects. Liam Greentree is an NHL player soon from the forward position. We don't really have any solid defensive prospects in our pipeline, in my opinion. So a couple of names that the Kings could be looking to pick, Sasha Boumediene from Boston University and Blake Fiddler, who's playing in the Western Hockey League, or who did play in the Western Hockey League. We've talked about both those guys if you watched any of the shows previously. Up next is Brian in Mission Viejo. He says, hey, Eddie, it's been a while since I sent an email, so I figured I'd chime in. First, I thoroughly enjoyed watching the smackdown the Oilers got this round of the finals. The Panthers have a stacked lineup. Second, let's talk cap space, knowing that Kopitar most likely is done after next season, and the year after, that's Drew's contract is up. Do you think players are opting in for 1 to 2 year deals this year versus 4 to 8 years? I would think players knowing that the cap is going up to $18 million in 2 years or going up $18 million in 2 years could affect their future contracts. Lastly, I'd like to see them re-sign Gavrikov for $7 to $8 million for 4 to 6 years. Trade Spence if they can get something worthy in a trade. Pick up Bennett and Marchand. He says, heck, at this point, even McDavid might take a deal for the Kings at the right price. That is if he wants a chance to win a cup. Go Kings, go. P.S. I'll see you at the NHL draft. And that was Brian in Mission Viejo, which he will. I am going to the NHL draft and excited to talk about that in a future show. As far as McDavid, he's not going anywhere. The Oilers are going to sign him. They're going to make him the highest paid player in the NHL. I mentioned Bennett apparently is staying put. So Marchand would be the only guy that would be still out there, maybe available. I think he wants to stay in Florida, and I think he would even give them a bit of a hometown discount to stay there, but we'll see. If the Kings re-sign Gavrikov, I think it's going to have to be for an 8-year deal. I've speculated about Kopitar retiring after this coming season. I don't know that. It wouldn't shock me that if the team had a good season, maybe he signs a 1-year deal and comes back for a little longer. We'll see. As for Drew Doughty, he is up. He's got 2 more years left on his contract. I think Drew will continue to play after that contract is up. I would assume that he would resign with the Kings, certainly for a lot less money than the $11 million he's making per year now. He will be 37 when his contract is up. You've got guys like Ryan Suter and Brent Burns are both 39 years old. They played this past season. They're both unrestricted free agents. I would not be shocked at all if they played again next season as well. The salary cap is going to be $95.5 million for next season. They say in a couple of years it'll be at $13.5 million. And I have heard that players like Mitch Mner might be interested in like a 3 or a 4-year deal and then cashing in still in their prime after a shorter term deal. So we'll see it if that is a factor because the cap is going up. It would make some sense. Robert in Hawthorne says, since Edmonton has signed Trent Frederick to 8 years, basically to beat up people and has a little skill as well, does this put a little more pressure on LA Kings GM Ken Holland to get a tough ice Tanner Jeannot signed because he is our sandpaper? That was Robert in Hawthorne. Well, I mentioned it earlier. If the report is true from our guy Russell Morgan, it looks like Tanner Jeannot is not coming back I don't know that the door is completely closed until he signs with another team. Trent Frederick, that deal, by the way, not official, but reportedly he's getting an 8-year deal. Does it put pressure on Ken Holland to sign someone? Maybe. As you know, I think we talked about the Oilers. I mean, they're not going anywhere, I don't think. And I hate to say this out loud, but I wouldn't even be shocked if we have to play them again in the playoffs next year. But to answer your question, I definitely think Ken Holland would like to sign someone to fill that Tanner Jeannot role next season. Who that might be, I do not know. And Scott in Anaheim checks and he says, I would love to see the Kings do an offer sheet to Evan Bouchard for $11.7 million. The Kings would give up 2 first-rounders, 1 second, and a third-rounder. If this can happen, I would let Vladislav Gavrikov walk, as I think he'll be getting $9 million for 5 years this offseason, and not worth that at his age. Although it is a right versus left, Bouchard is younger and more offensive. The other plus is an offer sheet forces the Oilers to spend cap space they don't have or lose a player they want. Either way, you're screwing over the Oilers. That is Scott in Anaheim. One thing we do have to remember about offer sheets, and Evan Bouchard is a restricted free agent, and he's available for an offer sheet. The players also have to want to sign the offer sheet. And I know people have talked about Matthew Knies in Toronto. I think Evan Bouchard in Edmonton's the same thing. I don't think they want to go anywhere, and I think they're going to get pretty big contracts from their team. So I don't see them cashing in on any kind of a free agent offer sheet. I don't think those two guys are guys that teams are going to let get away. So yeah, I mean, if it could happen, yeah, you would certainly be weakening the Oilers. But if you did, I'll play along. If you did, you're putting a right shot defenseman on the right side. Does that mean Brant Clark's going to be on the third pairing, and that doesn't really help his development, at least in the short term? And now what do you do on the left side? So I think if you're going to replace Gavrikov, you need to get a left shot to replace him. All right, we got more emails coming up here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Now that the Stanley Cup Finals have wrapped up, it reminds us how amazing playoff hockey can be, the energy, the rivalries, the nonstop action. It also reminds us how much fun it is to get out to games in person. Hockey, baseball, we got football season fast approaching, and Gametime makes getting in the game of your choice fast and affordable. Gametime gives you last-minute ticket deals, zone deals for deep discounts, panoramic seat views, and all-in pricing with no hidden fees. Plus, ticket prices often drop the closer you get to puck drop or first pitch or a kickoff, and you can score big without overpaying. Right now, Zone Deals are offering 10% off exclusive Zone Deals for FIFA Club World Cup matches. Gametime includes fees up front and backs every order with their ticket coverage guarantee, covering cancellations and even offering 24-hour returns. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, our next email comes from Andy in Guelph. He says, catching up on listening to the pod this week. Always a great listen. Thank you, Andy. I watched Mitch Mner play against Guelph in the OHL and many nights living only an hour from Toronto. I get fans are worried about an overpay and the playoff numbers, but I agree with you that I want the Kings always named like Vegas in for top players. Marner is a very good fit, not only the offensive production, but he also fits well for their defensive system and kills penalties. He's very good, and it's a very Leafy thing to thrive outside of Toronto. Get him, Ken. I love Bennett, but I don't think that contract would age well. I'd love to see them move Laffy with Phil and Fogle, and then add Marner and another winger to the top 6. I think Provorov would be a decent fit if Gabby walks. Your thoughts? And that was Andy in Guelph. I am really fascinated to see what Mitch Marner does out of that Toronto spotlight. Is he going to be just the same guy he's always been, or does he suddenly thrive out of that pressure situation? He's always going to have the solid numbers. Of course, he doesn't really show up in the big moments. I will say Trevor Moore, I would hate to see him go, but I understand it. I hate to get rid of him after, a down year after he has 30 goals. I'd like to see this year who he maybe really is. Like, will the real Trevor Moore show up and show us what he can do? But But I don't know. I thought he looked pretty good at the end of last season. Ivan Provorov, I think, would be an okay replacement for Gavrikov, but he made more money last season than Gavrikov. He is a year younger, so I don't know if he's going to be much cheaper, actually, than just re-signing Gavrikov. Maybe a little bit, but not significantly so, I don't think. Our next email comes from Sasan. He is in Westwood. He says, I would like to take a moment to congratulate the Edmonton Oilers on completing a feat that has not been seen at the NHL level in almost 50 years, back-to-back Stanley Cup final losers. I would also like to congratulate Corey Perry on losing 5 of the last 6 Stanley Cup finals, a feat I don't think will ever be broken. Finally, I would like to ask all Kings fans to join me in point and laugh at the Oilers' downfall, and that is Sasan in Westwood. I totally get it. We've talked about it. I took great delight in seeing the Oilers lose again. But let's keep it real. I mean, that team does own us. So there's that. We can all take, some comfort or some satisfaction in the fact that they didn't win the cup this year and they're all pretty devastated right now. But, we can't, as Kings fans, we really can't talk too much about the Oilers. Gary in Orange says, I haven't contributed to a Friday feedback in several months, so I'd like to mention a few things. Number one, I completely agree with you on Jim Hiller. I would have already replaced him for reasons everyone else has mentioned. Number two, I am not optimistic on the Kings re-signing Gavrikov or any other big-name free agents. That being said, we need to acquire players who embrace the opportunity and the challenge to help us get deep in the playoffs. I think of 3 who are currently for the Panthers that are now free agents. Number 3, I agree either Moore or Spence is likely to be traded, as they are 2 of the more tradable players on the roster. And number 4, my research indicates that this is a very weak draft. If we keep our number 1 pick, I would like to see us draft forward Riker Lee or defenseman Sasha Boumediene. Lee is an underrated name in this year's draft. Most think he'll be a second-round pick, but I think he could be a first-round steal. Boumediene is an offensive defenseman who put up good numbers in Sweden, and that was Gary in Orange. I did mention earlier about Boumediene. I assume the free agents you're talking about from Florida are Ekblad, Bennett, and Marchand. Bennett apparently is off the market. We'll see about the other 2. They also have, I will say, the Florida Panthers have a couple other UFAs that certainly aren't getting headlines. But if we're talking about tweaking things and making additions to solidify kind of the back end of things, a guy like a Tomas Nosek would be a nice 4th-line player. And then you got a veteran defenseman like Nate Schmidt, who could fill the void short term if Vladislav Gavrikov leads. So there are certainly some big names of the Panthers that we'll see where they go, but they've got some other names too that I think they know how to win. They know how to be part of that group. They know how to bring that attitude. Might be nice, not big time additions, but nice additions for some depth for the Kings. Brian in Los Alamitos says, it was nice to see the Corey Perry curse is still going strong as the Oilers let the Stanley Cup slip through their grasp once again. When I look at the Panthers, I see the team that Rob Blake and Luke Robitaille were trying to build, and maybe the team really is close or closer than I think, as Rob and Luke claimed a couple seasons ago. Between Vegas and Dallas, I believe the Kings gave the Oilers the hardest time in the playoffs before the finals, and maybe the Kings would have beaten the Oilers if it wasn't for Jim Hiller. My concern with Hiller is that everyone seems to agree that he made mistakes, everyone except one person, Jim Hiller. I never heard him take any accountability for his mistakes that he made, which leads me to believe that he doesn't think he made any, which further leads me to believe that he will make the mistakes again next year. I hope you and Carl Balikian are correct when you say Hiller will be on a short leash next year, especially with Pete DeBoer available, a coach who better understands how to navigate the playoffs. As usual, thank you for another great week of shows. And that was Brian in Los Alamitos. Yeah, I would be pretty shocked if Jim Hiller got off to a really bad start or there was a really prolonged slump during the season and a change wasn't made, especially if a guy like Pete DeBoer is still available, which who knows if that's going to be the case or not. I do also have to wonder, because you can't help it, but if the Kings had finished off the Oilers, how far that team could have gone. It's hard not to ponder that, but of course they didn't, and so we will never know. Darren from Orange County checks in. He says, everyday listener here for about a year now. Thank you, Darren. Love your pods, and it has become part of my daily routine. Awesome. He says, as a lifelong Kings fan, the one who has been to playoffs the last 4 years against the Oilers, I was absolutely ecstatic to see the Oilers lose again to the Panthers in the finals. I agree with you. No way any loyal Kings fan wants to see McDavid, etc., hoist the cup. I think the Oilers' window is closing fast as they are old and top-heavy with big salaries on the books. I would also like to add that what Evander Kane did in the closing minutes of the last game was truly classless. Not to mention, he didn't come back out for the handshake line, disrespecting the game, which shows his true character as a person. The guy is an absolute loser. Also wanted to add, seeing Corey Perry not get another cup again was very satisfying. Please don't get me wrong, or please don't get me started on Darnell Nurse, another classless player on the team. One more thought about upcoming free agency. As you discussed previously, the Kings have never made a true earth-shaking signing. I don't see it coming this offseason. Can Holland change this? We shall see. I could see them getting a game changer via trade like they've done in the past. Either way, I'll be watching to see what they do this offseason before the draft. Keep up the amazing job that you do. And that was Darren in Orange County. I've said that I like to think of myself as being a pretty positive guy. And because Ken Holland is new, we don't really have a feel exactly for what he's going to do. I would say I'm cautiously optimistic about what the Kings do in free agency, but it's also kind of hard not to feel like the I'll believe it when I see it kind of mindset because the Kings, that's what they've always been. They've never really done anything in free agency. So it's hard to think that this year is going to be different, but we shall see. It's a new GM, so you never know. And I would say I completely agree with your thoughts on Evander Kane. More emails to come. That's next on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Let's check in with Gary in Long Beach. He says, just wanted to say thanks for all the hard work. Your podcast is the reason my commute doesn't result in me questioning my life choices. So truly, thank you. Well, Gary, thank you for those kind words and for listening. He says, after listening to part 1 of the feedback episode, I am downing a frankly, hold on. Here we go. I got to get this right okay. So truly thank you. After listening to part 1 of the feedback episode and downing a frankly irresponsible amount of wonderful pistachios, I've been thinking even more about what the Kings should do this offseason. And I'm here to say I'm officially joining the fix the bottom 6 movement, especially after the Kuzmenko experiment worked out. So either lock him in or slot Besser in and move on. It's time for the Kings to invest in the bottom 6 and some extra depth that we can actually trust in the playoffs. Same thing with the bottom pair on D. Injuries are going to happen. We need some extra guys that don't dread seeing on the ice in May and June, not guys that we notice for all the wrong reasons. And please, let's not hand out a giant contract to someone we'll regret faster than a bacon-wrapped street dog after the game. I am terrified of a regrettable contract that sticks around when QB gets his big raise and Kempe's contract lets him buy Kopi's place on the Strand. Thanks again. Loving the pod. And that was Gary in Long Beach. Gary, very well done getting a show sponsor in your email. That is always welcome. I think the third line's okay. The fourth line, though, does need to be addressed. I agree re-signing Kuzmenko, and let's give him a full season to see what he can do. I'm not against that. If you want to add someone else that you feel is an upgrade on the right shot, right defense, right wing situation, that's great. But I agree, work on the depth. I don't really hate that idea at all. I think, what do you do if Gavrikov is gone is the big issue. You're losing your best defenseman. And so that has to be answered. And we've talked about it before. Maybe you put Edmondson in that slot and then you look to upgrade at the trade deadline going into the playoffs. We'll see. But to your point, address that right shot, right wing situation, and then work on the rest of the roster, the bottom part of the roster. I see where you're coming from on that. Scott in Simi Valley says, there is no way any longtime Kings fan can pull up the hated Oilers. It is simply not possible. My dislike for the bad guys doesn't consume me, but it is great to see the Oilers fly home with their frowns on their evil faces again. Speaking of the hated, it's interesting that they're in a jam to sign McDavid while still building a roster that they can beat Florida. Many will point to the cost of both Draisaitl and 97, but I look at the horrible Darnell Nurse contract as their biggest issue. Besides the fact that he stinks, Nurse is also the most overpaid NHL player of all, and it's great that the Kings don't have to worry about such a tenable cap drain. Or maybe we do. After all, it was Ken Holland who inked that miserable deal with Nurse, which brings me to the Marner question. I appreciate the view that the Kings should try for the big free agents, but I strongly believe it is a colossal mistake in Marner's case. At the cost, he should be flat out ignored. Take the Mason Marchment signing, for example. What a bargain Seattle got there. I sure hope the Kings weren't blinded to it by the Mitch Marner pipe dream. Maybe Dallas just didn't want to deal Marchman to LA, but I'm really disappointed if we didn't try. At his age and with a short-term GM contract, Ken Holland is in the only one in the driver's seat. He can steer this team where he wants and won't be here to suffer if things go badly. I hope Holland acts quickly and ignores the cries to sign big buck players who won't get us to the finals and instead builds a deep, balanced roster to the ones the Kings had in their cup years. We can't out Edmonton the Oilers, and it will be tough to out Florida the Panthers, but Holland's got to try, and he's got to try now. He can't wait to see what happens with Marner, and he's got to get top coaches or we'll absolutely have zero chance at another cup. That was Scott in Simi Valley. I get the strong opinions on both sides with Mitch Marner. I guess I'll just kind of repeat what I said about him. My thoughts on wanting the Kings to be in on the biggest names because it's Los Angeles and, hope we want to be that kind of organization. That speaks for itself. And I think Marner is a talented guy, but if you're going to pay someone that much money, he has to be the guy. And I just don't think Mitch Marner is the guy, like the piece that's going to get you where you want to go. Good player, would help, but for that price, is he that guy to get you over the hump? I don't know. I don't think so. So we'll see. And then I say that he'll probably sign with Vegas and become MVP next year or whatever. We'll see. Michael Iglesias is from Parts Unknown. He says, if the LA Kings sign a right-handed shot, be it Marner, Besser, or whomever, will this lead to Laferriere playing fourth line minutes? Because I don't believe Fogle and Moore will drop from the third line. Also, what will this mean for Liam Greentree once he's NHL ready? I believe 2 seasons from now. It doesn't appear we will have room for everyone. Also, if Gavrikov doesn't resign, I'm curious to know how far along our in-house defense prospects options are, such as Jakub Dvorak, Angus Booth, Jared Woolley, and Kirill Kirsanov. If any of these players are no more than 2 seasons away from being NHL ready, does it make sense to sign an older veteran for a couple of years and use the extra salary in the meantime to sign offensive talent or towards signing Clark long-term? And that was Michael in Parts Unknown. Well, if the Kings sign Besser or Marner, then that replaces Kuzmenko. I would assume that you would add whoever that player would be to Byfield and Fiala on the top line, a second line of Kopitar, Kempe, and Laferriere, I would think. And then you've got Fogle, Deneau, and Moore, if he's still around, on the third line. So I don't see Laferriere on the fourth line. If somehow the Kings add a couple of top 6 forwards and it forces him to be on the fourth line, I guess if you're looking to improve the depth of the team, that would be okay. If you're saying Liam Greentree is 2 years away, which I think is accurate, you've got some contracts that would be coming off the books by then. Maybe Kopitar, Philip Deneau's contract would be up. Warren Fogel's contract would be up. So it's, there is room for him to slot in if he's ready to play in the NHL. As far as the defense, I think the only player you mentioned that might be NHL ready is Angus Booth. We'll see what Kirill Kirsanov does in his first year with the Ontario Reign coming up this year. Maybe he can open some eyes. I think Jared Woolley and probably Jakub Dvorak are way down the line. Those guys are multiple years away from being NHL players, if at all. Faisal in Rancho Santa Margarita. I hope I pronounced that first name correctly. He says, I wanted to respond to your statement on Friday's show where you agreed with the fan that felt it was preferable to lose in the round 1 for 4 years in a row than lose in the finals for 2 years in a row. I can see how going out relatively quickly is less heartache than going far, only to ultimately fall short of your true goal. To that, I would say that as a fan of a team, you want to ultimately watch your team play as long as possible. I understand Kings fans rooting against the Oilers, but imagine how different the past 4 years would feel if this incarnation of the Kings team had made it to even one cup appearance. I bet Rob Blake would still have his job as GM. Thanks for all you do for us Kings fans. And that was Faisal in Rancho Santa Margarita. First of all, I wasn't agreeing with a fan that said that. I was the one who said that. I was the one who said I would rather lose in the first round 4 years in a row than lose in the Stanley Cup Finals 2 years in a row. And I totally get what you're saying. And if you truly asked me to trade places with the Oilers right now, would I? I guess I'd have to say yes, because it would mean that there's, that team's going to be probably still a legitimate Stanley Cup contender next season. But I cannot imagine losing back-to-back Stanley Cup finals. That would just be absolutely brutal. Just absolutely brutal. I don't know how they recover from that, to be honest. And, if I'm being truthful, I hope they don't. Our final email comes from Ed in Brea, who has a guarantee. He says, I guarantee the Kings will not sign a major free agent since Marner and Bennett will sign elsewhere. Maybe a trade. The Panthers made a bold trade of Matthew Tkachuk for Jonathan Huberdeau. Should the Kings trade Kopitar or Doughty or both to shake things up? I will say, if the Kings made this bold move, like for a Jason Robertson or a Jonathan Marchessault or a Steven Stamkos type of player, it would show Ken Holland is serious about winning. And that was Ed in Brea. Well, Ed, I mean, the Tkachuk Huberdeau trade was a standout player for a standout player in their primes at the time. It certainly has worked out very well for Florida, not quite so well for Calgary, but Kopitar and Doughty are not those types of guys. They're not anywhere near their prime. So it's not that kind of trade it's just not the same thing. It's apples to oranges. So we'll see. There's no, we're not going to trade something comparable would be like Adrian Kempe for Jason Robertson or something like that. And that's not going to happen. All right. I say this every week, and I guess I'm saying it twice this week, but thank you to everyone who took the time to email. This feedback show is literally not possible without your participation. Coming up for you everydayers, we've got a big week ahead. Coming up next week, we've got the draft on Friday and Saturday. What we're probably going to do is Friday we'll do our first segment will be all about whoever the Kings select with their first round pick if they don't trade the pick. And then we'll do the rest of the emails that we can fit in. And then probably we'll do an extra show on Sunday. First segment will be all about the rest of the players the Kings pick in the draft. And then the rest of that show will be the remaining emails that we have. So a busy back end of next week coming up with the NHL draft here in LA on the horizon. Excited about it. If you would like to get an email in for the feedback show, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. You can always leave your comments if you're watching on YouTube in the comment section as well. Love you to stay interactive with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you next time. And as always, go Kings, go.